Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're unearthing something truly extraordinary. A set of reflections that are so personal, yet, well, they just seem to speak to everyone, even now, thousands of years later.
It's pretty amazing stuff.
Yeah, imagine the most powerful man in the world back then, the Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius.
Right.
And he writes something not for anyone else, not for fame or politics, just to himself. That was the original title, wasn't it?
Exactly. Iceuton, to himself. He never saw himself as some grand philosopher,
Yeah.
The academic type.
No, he called himself a diligent student, I think, and an imperfect practitioner.
That's it. Humble, considering who he was. Yet this private journal, these notes, became meditations, a book that's genuinely shaped lives. Emperors, presidents, just ordinary people trying to get through the day.
It's such a paradox, isn't it? This very private book, like you said, spiritual exercises. I like that description.
Yeah, Pierre Hadot called them that. Fits perfectly.
Penned by a guy who, honestly, kind of stumbled into being emperor. He wasn't expecting it, and the burdens he carried, unimaginable.
Absolutely. So our mission today in this deep dive is to really unpack meditations. We want to look at the history around it. Marcus's surprising path to power, the struggles he faced day to day.
And then get into the philosophy itself, right? Stoicism. What did he actually believe? Why did it mean so much to him?
Exactly. And why does it still feel so relevant? Well, look at the structure of the book. It's not exactly conventional.
Definitely not.
And crucially, how its wisdom offers, practical tools.
Yeah.
Tools for anyone dealing with, the chaos and complexity of life today. We want you to walk away with a really solid, actionable understanding. Point out some surprising zits, memorable stories, things you can actually use.
For sure. And you mentioned rulers and philosophy. It makes you think of Plato, right? That famous line from the Republic.
Oh, yeah. States will never be happy until rulers become philosophers or philosophers become rulers. Classic.
And for so many people, Marcus Aurelius is that guy, the ultimate philosopher king. He's almost legendary.
He really is held up as the embodiment of that ideal.
But as we'll get into, while the legend fits in some ways, Marcus himself would have probably just shaken his head at the title Philosopher King.
Oh, absolutely. He saw himself as still learning, always striving, not someone who'd arrived.
Which I think is a great place to start. Let's dig into the reality behind the legend, understand this man, and why his private thoughts became such a public treasure. Okay, so to really get meditations, we need to get the man first. Marcus Aurelius, born Marcus Annius Verus, way back in 81-21.
Right, and born into a pretty prominent Roman family. Aristocrats.
But nobody, and I mean nobody, was thinking future emperor when he was born. That wasn't the plan at all.
Not even close. The expectation was, a solid career, maybe the Senate, maybe imperial administration. Respectable upper-class path.
Ruling the known world, that was definitely not on the cards back then.
No. And that's important. His early life wasn't grooming for ultimate power. It was preparation for public service. Yeah, but within the existing system.
The Historia Augusta, that collection of biographies, sometimes a bit gossipy, right?
Yeah, it's taken with a grain of salt sometimes, but it gives us glimpses.
It says he was a serious kid, which kind of fits the image we have.
It does. But it also shows he wasn't just some bookworm shut away. He was active. Like boxing, wrestling, running.
Falconry, ball games, hunting. Pretty standard stuff for a Roman noble youth.
Exactly. Typical upper-class pursuits. These weren't just games. They built discipline, physical and mental. Important for that society. So definitely not just a quiet scholar.
That mix is interesting. The serious mind, but also the active body. What about his actual schooling? Roman education for the elite was pretty intense, wasn't it?
Oh, incredibly demanding. Initially, the basics, reading, writing, probably taught by educated slaves in the household. That was common.
Then the real education kicked in.
Yeah, private tutors, the best they could get. He was immersed in the classics. Virgil's Aeneid, obviously foundational for Romans. Homer's Iliad and Odyssey. Tragedies like Euripides.
But the goal wasn't just literature appreciation, was it? It was practical.
Absolutely. The big focus was rhetoric, the art of persuasion, public speaking.
That was the ticket to a political career. I can picture him, practicing, debating fake law cases.
Or giving advice to historical figures like, should Caesar cross the Rubicon, that kind of thing. Really sharpens the mind, weighing arguments, thinking on your feet, mastering language, incredible training.
And this wasn't just in Latin.
No, crucially, he was fluent in both Latin and Greek. Very common for the Roman upper class then. Greek was the language of culture, of intellectuals, and overwhelmingly of philosophy.
Ah, okay. So that explains why Meditations itself is written in Greek. He was thinking philosophically, so he used the language of philosophy.
Precisely. He studied the great Greek orators like Demosthenes just as much as the Latin master Cicero.
It makes sense then, his key teachers. Herodes Atticus for Greek rhetoric, Marcus Cornelius Fronto for Latin.
Both major figures.
And it's interesting that story about Fronto, his Latin tutor. He was apparently a bit disappointed when Marcus started leaning more towards philosophy, away from rhetoric.
Yeah, there are letters suggesting that. Fronto clearly cared deeply for Marcus, saw huge potential in rhetoric for him. Philosophy might have seemed like, well, a distraction from the path of public service.
A sign of Marcus's own intellectual path forming, maybe.
Definitely. But then his actual path to the throne, pure circumstance, really. Almost an accident of history.
Right, tell us about that. Emperor Hadrian was key, wasn't he?
He was. Hadrian was getting old, he was ill, and he had no children. He'd chosen a successor, Lucius Cionius Commodus.
But he died unexpectedly.
Well, died suddenly in 137 AD. So Hadrian had to choose again. He picked a respected childless senator named Antoninus. He was actually Marcus's uncle by marriage.
Okay, so Antinous is the new heir.
But there was a condition, a big one. And Antoninus had to adopt two people. Marcus, his nephew by marriage, who was about 16 then.
And the son of the first guy Hadrian chose, Lucius Verus.
Exactly. Lucius Verus, who was much younger. So Antoninus adopts them both. Marcus becomes Marcus Aurelius Antoninus. And when Hadrian dies a year later, in 138...
Marcus is suddenly first in line for the throne. Wow.
Just like that. His education, already serious, now becomes a massive imperial priority. Antoninus oversees it personally.
And Antoninus reigned for quite a while, didn't he? A period of relative peace.
Yes, until 161 AD.
Yeah.
A long, stable reign. But when Antoninus died, Marcus did something unusual.
He didn't just take power for himself.
No. He immediately insisted that Lucius Verus, his adopted brother, be made co-emperor with him.
Co-regency. That wasn't common. Why?
Well, maybe it was honoring Hadrian's original plan, which involved both families. Or maybe it was just practical. The empire was huge. The job was immense. Sharing the load might have made sense.
The Historia Augusta isn't very kind to Lucius Verus, is it? Paints him as a bit of a playboy.
It does. The self-indulgent, degenerate narrative, especially about his time commanding troops in the East. But you have to be careful with that source.
What did Marcus himself think?
In Meditations, in Book 1, Marcus actually praises Verus, thanks him for his good character, his affection. So the reality might be more complex than the gossipy history suggests.
Fair enough. But in practice, Marcus was the senior partner.
Oh, clearly. He was older. He'd been groomed for the role by Antoninus for over 20 years. He was the guiding hand, even if they shared the title.
So, okay, he's emperor, this philosopher is now running the show. Did that translate into, like, radical Stoic policies, or was it more subtle?
Much more subtle. And honestly, the power of a Roman emperor, while absolute in theory, was kind of limited in practice when it came to day-to-day policy across the whole empire.
Really? How so?
A huge amount of their time was just administration. Yeah. Receiving ambassadors, hearing legal appeals from provinces, answering questions from governors, dealing with petitions from individuals. It was relentless.
Sounds less like philosophy and more like being buried in paperwork.
Pretty much. It wasn't sitting around decreeing virtue. It was managing the machinery of a vast state.
But we do see hints of his philosophy, his personality, in the surviving laws and documents from his reign.
We do, absolutely. There's legislation that seems to show a real interest in making it easier to free slaves, legally speaking, and rules about protecting orphans.
Which people connect to his philosophy or even his own life. He lost his father young.
Exactly. Some historians draw those lines. Whether it was radically different from Antoninus is debatable, but the interest seems genuine. And what's really noticeable in official documents is his meticulousness, his concern for using exactly the right word, the precise legal term.
The mochist. His old rhetoric training coming through.
Absolutely. Frendo would have been proud of that, at least. And that precision, that careful thought, connects directly to the way he writes in Meditations, trying to get things exactly right in his own mind.
That attention to detail in language and thought, linking the private man and the public ruler. What about the Senate? That relationship was always tricky for emperors.
Crucial. Marcus, like other smart emperors, prioritized good relations with the Senate. It was partly about maintaining the image of cooperative rule, even though everyone knew the emperor had the final say. The Principate, that system, was accepted.
But you still needed the Senate on side.
You did. They held prestige, influence, keeping them happy, consulting them, showing respect. It disguised the reality of absolute power and helped build consensus. Plus, senators often wrote the history books later. So, cultivating them was good politics, and it definitely contributed to Marcus's reputation as a good, benevolent ruler.
Okay, now the tough one. His treatment of Christians. It clashes with the image of the humane philosopher, doesn't it?
It's definitely a difficult aspect for modern readers, and it's complex. He basically continued the existing policy. Christians weren't actively hunted down systematically.
But if they were accused and they admitted it.
They were executed, yes. His own mentor, Junius Rusticus, the one who introduced him to Epictetus, presided over the trial and execution of Justin Martyr, a prominent Christian philosopher.
So why? Was it about belief? Did the Stoic emperor hate their theology?
Not really about theology. From the Roman state's perspective, the problem was refusal. Christians refused to participate in the state cults, wouldn't sacrifice to the traditional gods, wouldn't acknowledge the emperor's divine status.
Which was seen as, what, disloyalty?
Worse, it was seen as undermining the Pax Deorum, the peace with the gods which protected the state. It looked like stubbornness, sedition, a threat to social order and the well-being of the community. It wasn't just about private belief, it was seen as rejecting civic duty.
So Stoicism's emphasis on social duty and harmony didn't extend to tolerating this perceived threat to social harmony.
Exactly. The state's perceived need for unity and order trumped any philosophical leanings towards tolerance in the specific high-stakes case. It's a stark reminder of the different worldview.
A very different world. And his reign wasn't peaceful internally either, was it? It was marked by almost constant war.
Very much so. That shadow hangs over meditations. He spent a huge portion of his reign on the frontiers, especially fighting the Marcomannic Wars along the Danube River in the 170.
Grueling campaigns, right?
Incredibly tough. And after Lucius Verus died in 169, possibly from plague caught on campaign, Marcus was commanding alone. And these weren't neat wars against one big enemy. It was messy, dealing with numerous Germanic and Sarmatian tribes, constant negotiations, skirmishes, complex diplomacy, brutal, grinding work.
And on top of external threats, he faced revolt from within.
Yes, a major challenge. Avidius Cassius, a successful general in the East, rebelled in 175. He heard a false rumor that Marcus had died and declared himself emperor.
Civil war.
Merely came to that. But Cassius was assassinated by one of his own officers before Marcus even got there. Still, Marcus had to travel east to restore order, reaffirm loyalty. And during that trip, his wife, Faustina, died.
So constant war, political betrayal, personal loss, and disappointment with his own son, Commodus.
Yeah, the realization that Commodus wasn't shaping up to be the successor he'd hoped for must have been a heavy blow. When you pile all that up, the sheer weight of the job, the dangers, the sorrows, it's no wonder he turned so intensely to philosophy, for comfort, for guidance, for strength. Meditations was his lifeline.
Okay, that gives us such a vital context for the man writing these words, the immense pressure, the constant challenges. Now, let's shift focus to the philosophy itself, the core ideas in Meditations.
Right. And the first thing to grasp is how different ancient philosophy was from, say, a lot of academic philosophy today.
Yeah, today philosophy can seem very abstract, very removed from everyday life. Big questions about ethics, suffering, death. Those often get pushed towards religion or therapy now.
Exactly. But for Marcus, and for the ancients generally, philosophy was intensely practical. It wasn't just thinking about life, it was a way of life, a design for living, as some scholars put it.
Like a blueprint for how to be a good person, how to live well.
Precisely. It offered rules, ethical guidelines, ways to handle emotions, things that traditional Greco-Roman religion, which was more focused on rituals and community festivals, didn't really provide in the same way. Philosophy filled that gap, offering a moral compass.
And within that world, different schools emerged, like Stoicism, which became huge, especially in Rome.
Hugely important. It started in Greece, of course.
Yeah.
Founded by Zeno of Citium around 300 BC. He taught in Athens, famously in the Stoa Poikile, the painted porch, hence the name Stoicism.
And others developed his ideas.
Yes, notably Cleanthes and especially Chrysippus. Chrysippus wrote an enormous amount, really systematized Stoic doctrine. Logic, physics, ethics, but also practical stuff, like how to read poetry properly. It was a whole worldview.
A complete system. How did it catch on so strongly in Rome? Why did it appeal to those pragmatic Romans, especially the elite? It became almost the default philosophy for the upper class, didn't it?
It really did. Several reasons. Unlike some other schools, like Epicureanism, which sometimes advocated withdrawal from public life, Stoicism approved of participation. It valued duty, self-control, resilience, political action, military service, all things that resonated deeply with traditional Roman aristocratic values.
So it fit their culture, their expectations of a noble life.
Perfectly. It gave them an ethical framework for being senators, generals, governors. It really did become, as you said, almost the real religion of upper-class Romans.
So who were the big names in Roman Stoicism that Marcus would have been reading, learning from?
Well, there was Seneca the Younger, hugely influential writer, essays, letters, plays. His Latin works were widely read.
A master of Stoic ethics.
Definitely. Then there was Musonius Rufus, more of an ascetic figure, really emphasized putting philosophy to practice. And then critically for Marcus, there was Epictetus.
Epictetus, the former slave who became this incredibly respected teacher.
What's him? His teachings were written down by his student, Arrian, the Discourses, and the Enchiridion, which means handbook.
And that Enchiridion, the handbook, it's structurally quite similar to Meditations, isn't it? Short entries, practical advice.
Very similar in form and content. And Marcus explicitly thanks his tutor Rusticus in Book 1 for introducing him to Epictetus's works. So we know Epictetus was a direct, major influence.
Makes sense. And Epictetus's version of Stoicism is often described as kind of stripped down, focused mainly on ethics.
Yes, a radically stripped-down version is how one scholar puts it. Less emphasis on the complex physics or logic that Crispus elaborated, much more focus on the practical ethics of living, how to achieve inner peace, how to deal with misfortune.
And we see that same focus in Meditations, right? Marcus isn't writing a treatise on cosmology.
Not at all. He gives nods to logic and physics, but his overwhelming concern is ethics, how to live rightly. He sees the other branches mainly in terms of how they help solve human problems.
There's that quote, isn't there? Something like, even if you're not a great scientist, don't give up on being free, humble, serving others.
That's 7.67. It's incredibly poignant. It shows his priority. Becoming a better person, not necessarily an intellectual giant. Philosophy for him was about character, about virtue in action.
So what are the fundamental questions he's wrestling with in Meditations? The big, mortal questions.
The absolute core ones. Why are we here? What's our purpose? How should we live? How do we know what's right? And how do we do it, especially when it's hard? How do we handle stress, pain, loss, fear of death? It's about finding a solid, reliable guide for navigating everything life throws at you.
And the Stoic answer often comes down to these three disciplines, right? Identified by Pierre Hadot. This seems to be the practical heart of it all.
Absolutely. These three disciplines, perception, action, and will, they're central to Marcus and Epictetus. They're not really separate boxes. They work together. It's a whole approach to life.
Okay, let's break them down. First one, the discipline of perception. Objectivity of thought. What's that about?
This is fundamental. It's about seeing things as they are, without adding our own emotional spin or judgment. Maintaining absolute objectivity.
How does that work in Stoic terms? Impressions and perceptions.
Right, we get impressions fantasia from our senses, just raw data about the world. Then our mind processes these into perceptions, hypolepsis. That's our interpretation, our understanding.
And the ideal is an accurate perception, one that matches reality.
Exactly. But the problem comes when we slap value judgments onto things. We label events good or evil, terrible, or wonderful.
When really the event itself is just an event, neutral.
Precisely. The Stoics argue that most things we worry about are actually indifferent, morally neutral. It's our judgment about them that causes distress. Marcus uses the example of his house burning down. The impression is just, house is burning.
But the perception is often, oh no, this is a catastrophe, a terrible tragedy.
Right. That terrible tragedy part is the interpretation, the hypolepsis. And Marcus says, you don't have to accept that interpretation. You can choose to see it simply as an event that happened.
That's powerful. So the discipline is about controlling that interpretation, filtering out the unhelpful judgments.
Yes. Exercising strict control over perception to protect the mind from error, from disturbance. As Marcus puts it repeatedly, it is not things themselves that disturb people, but their judgments about things. Or it is not objects and events, but the interpretations we place on them that are the problem. That's the key insight. Separate the event from your story about the event.
Okay, that's perception. What about the second one? The discipline of action. This sounds like how we interact with the world, with others.
Exactly. This governs our relationships and our duties. The starting point for Stoics is that humans are fundamentally social creatures. We have reason, a spark of the divine logos.
The rational principle governing the universe.
Right. And because we're rational and social, our nature requires us to live in community, to cooperate. Marcus often uses the metaphor of the world as a city and all humans as citizens.
So our duty isn't just to ourselves, but to the community, the cosmic city.
Yes, we need to live as nature requires, which means using our reason to play our part in the larger plan, the cosmic order. It requires active cooperation with fate, with the world, and especially with other people. It's not about passive withdrawal, it's about engagement.
And he really stresses unselfishness, doesn't he? We were made for others.
He repeats that idea often. Our nature is fundamentally unselfish. We find our own good in contributing to the common good. This leads directly to the importance of justice, treating others fairly, working for the collective benefit.
Which for him, as emperor, meant tireless work for the state.
It did. But we need that context again. Justice for Marcus operated within the existing Roman social hierarchy. It meant treating people according to their station, fulfilling the duties of your role.
So not radically challenging the system, like slavery, for example.
No. The Stoics generally accepted the social structure as part of the given nature of things. The focus was on acting virtuously within that structure, not on revolutionary change. That's a point modern critics often raise.
Understandable. Okay, third discipline, the discipline of will. This is the one about acceptance, accepting what's outside our control.
Yes, this is the flip side of action. Action is about what we do, what's in our power. Will is about our attitude towards what happens to us, things done by others or by nature, things we can't control.
And the core idea is that only our own choices, our own judgments, can truly harm us.
Exactly. Wrong actions harm our own character, our own reason. External things, illness, poverty, loss, even death cannot harm our essential self, our inner logos, unless we choose to interpret them as harmful.
So if we judge external events as bad, we're actually hurting ourselves by resisting the rational order of the universe.
That's the Stoic view. Yeah. We degrade our own reason. The discipline of will is about assent, willingly accepting whatever happens, trusting the logos, trusting that whatever is right, even if it seems unpleasant.
Especially death. He talks about death a lot.
Constantly. As something natural, inevitable, and therefore not truly evil. It's just dissolution, part of the cosmic cycle.
Yeah.
Not something to fear or lament. Pain, too, it's limited, bearable, if we don't add fearful thoughts to it.
So perception shapes how we see things, action guides what we do, and will shapes how we accept what we can't control. And they all work together.
They're completely intertwined. It's a unified system for living. Marcus spells it out sometimes, like in 7.54. Accept events humbly, will, treat people justly. Action, approach thoughts carefully, perception.
Or 9.6, objective judgment, unselfish action, willing acceptance.
Exactly. It's a constant practice, applying all three moment by moment to maintain your inner equilibrium, your rational course, no matter what's happening outside. That's the goal.
All right, let's talk more about the book Meditations itself. As a piece of writing, it's unique. Starting with the title, Meditations isn't even his title, and it's kind of misleading.
Completely. As we said, the Greek is eiseuton, to himself. Meditations suggest something calm, maybe structured. This is more like personal memoranda. Notes to self.
And definitely not for publication. You can tell, can't you?
Oh, absolutely. It's full of these cryptic little references to people, events, things only he would understand. He reflects on being emperor, specific worries about becoming imperialized, reminders about speaking in the Senate. The you he addresses constantly is himself. It's a self-dialogue.
So not a diary with dates and places, though a couple of books mention where he was, like by the River Gran among the Quadi.
Right. Book 2 starts that way. But mostly, no dates, no sense of audience. And it's not a philosophical treatise either.
Why not? It's full of philosophy.
True, but it's too repetitive for a treatise. You keep circling back to the same core ideas, and philosophically, it's relatively elementary compared to, say, Chrysippus. It's not exploring new ground, it's reinforcing existing beliefs.
Which brings us back to Hedet's idea, spiritual exercises.
Exactly. It's the perfect description.
Yeah.
It's a self-help book in the most literal sense imaginable. Written by the self, for the self. A way to cope, to stay grounded amidst all the chaos and stress he was under.
Each entry is like a little mental workout, a reminder.
Urging, directing, exhorting himself, reframing the same answers again and again to make them stick, to internalize them.
And then that explains the repetition, the seeming lack of structure. It's the process that mattered to him, not creating a polished final product.
Precisely. The shapelessness, the apparent disorder, that's because it wasn't meant as a finished work. We don't even know who divided it into the 12 books we have now or why.
Maybe just separate papyrus rolls he filled up?
That's the most likely theory. And there's no real sense of development from book 2 to book 12. It's the same themes, the same struggles, revisited, except for book one.
Ah, yes, book one stands apart. How so?
It's completely different. It's deliberately structured, almost autobiographical. It's a series of 17 entries where Marcus thanks specific people in his life family, teachers like Rusticus and Fronto, his adopted father Antoninus, even the gods.
For the lessons they taught him, the virtues they modeled, debts and lessons.
Exactly. It follows a rough chronology of his life and influences. It feels consciously designed by Marcus as a kind of preface or acknowledgement. It's the only book like that. A beautiful expression of gratitude.
Very cool. So, outside of book one, the entries themselves vary a lot too, not all philosophical aphorisms.
Not at all. It's a real mix. You get short, developed essays on a theme, sharp commands. He gives himself imperatives, aphorisms, lists or catalogs of things to remember.
And vivid analogies, right.
Loads of them. Lumps of incense burning on an altar for impermanence, a rock thrown in the air returning to earth, a severed hand or foot representing isolation from the whole community.
He even has exercises like imagining past imperial courts.
Yeah, picturing the court of Augustus or Vespasian all long gone to remind himself of the transience of his own time and power. Very practical visualization.
Some are just quotes from others, some are rough notes.
Yep. Some seem like quick jots, maybe even unfinished thoughts. And honestly, some entries are still pretty obscure. We just don't have the context he had.
But even in these private notes, his training shines through, that rhetoric background.
You could definitely see it. Some entries are quite literary, polished even. Wordplay, conciseness, like evil. Same old thing. So blunt. Or not a dancer, but a wrestler. A great metaphor for life requiring struggle, not just grace.
And sometimes he seems to be arguing with himself.
Yes. Little snippets of internal dialogue. An anxious voice raises an objection, and a calmer philosophical voice responds. It shows the struggle was real for him.
The writing style itself, sometimes powerful, sometimes a bit dense.
It can be.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes maybe a bit labored or awkward, perhaps because he was thinking as he wrote, or maybe his tendency to pile up similar words.
Yeah.
But when it works, it's incredibly effective. Those images like existence flows past us like a river really stick with you.
Now, Stoicism is clearly the main ingredient here. But was he only a Stoic? Did other philosophies influence him?
That's a great question. He rarely calls himself a Stoic. He just says he studied philosophy. And there was definitely an ecumenical trend in philosophy during the Roman Empire.
Meaning different schools were borrowing from each other, focusing on common ground.
Exactly. Platonists, Peripatetics, followers of Aristotle, Cynics, Stoics, they often emphasized shared ethical ideas. Marcus himself credits non-Stoics. He learned from Severus, who was a peripatetic. He was looking for wisdom wherever it came from.
Who are the really big non-Stoic influences then? Socrates seems huge for him.
Absolutely central. Socrates, who turned philosophy towards ethics and how to live, was a hero for the Stoics and for Marcus personally. He quotes Plato, Socrates' student, all the time.
And the Socratic idea that nobody does wrong on purpose.
Yes, the Socratic paradox, wrongdoing, comes from ignorance. Marcus mentions that. He saw Socrates as a role model for integrity, endurance, courage, especially facing hardship or political pressure.
What about Heraclitus, the pre-Socratic, famous for everything flows?
Heraclitus was also very important. His ideas about the logos and fire being fundamental, his concept of constant change, and his enigmatic, punchy style all resonated with Stoicism and with Marcus.
That concise style seems very Heraclitean. The best revenge is not to be like that.
Classic Marcus, channeling Heraclitus. And the whole theme of flux, impermanence, owes a lot to him.
And the Cynics. Diogenes living in a barrel, rejecting society.
Cynicism had an influence too. Their radical rejection of conventions, their emphasis on living according to nature, being a citizen of the world. These ideas fit into Stoicism. Marcus mentions Diogenes, admiring that kind of hardcore asceticism, the philosopher without clothes.
Okay, then the big rival, Epicureanism, focused on pleasure, avoiding pain. How did Marcus deal with them? He mostly disagreed, right?
Oh, yeah, generally disapproved. He contrasted the Epicurean view of a universe of random atoms colliding, mixture, interaction, dispersal, with the Stoic-ordered, providentially guided cosmos, unity, order, design.
Sounds like fundamental disagreement.
It was. But remarkably, Marcus still quotes Epicurus. Specifically, he quotes him with approval on how to endure pain and illness with composure.
Really? He quotes the opposition leader.
He does. It shows his pragmatism. If Epicurus offered good advice on handling pain, Marcus was willing to use it. It demonstrates that willingness to accept truth wherever he found it, even from a rival school. He wanted what worked for living a good life, not just points for Team Stoa.
Okay, so we've looked at Marcus the man, the core Stoic ideas, the unique book itself, and his influences. Let's bring it home. What are the really enduring lessons here, the practical takeaways for us living our lives today?
This is where Meditations really shines, why it still speaks so powerfully. It's packed with actionable insights. One huge one is duty and purpose.
That quote about getting up in the morning.
Yes, I have to go to work as a human being. What do I have to complain of if I'm going to do what I was born for? It's such a powerful reframe, asking yourself, what am I here to do? What's my function? It grounds you.
It's about embracing your role, whatever it is, with intention.
Exactly. Doing what we were designed for. It gives a sense of meaning beyond just personal happiness. It's about contribution, about fulfilling your nature. Why complain when you're doing what you're meant to do?
That's a really good one. Another massive theme is controlling the inner self, that inner citadel.
Absolutely fundamental. Nowhere you can go is more peaceful than your own soul. That peace isn't out there somewhere. It's within you. It depends on your thoughts, your judgments.
The mind makes itself what it chooses.
Right. The mind is roused and directed by itself. It makes of itself what it chooses. This idea of mental sovereignty is key. Your interpretations, your attitudes, those are yours to control. That's your fortress, your refuge, even when everything outside is chaotic. It's the foundation of resilience. No one can disturb your peace unless you allow your judgment to be disturbed.
Which is easier said than done, but a powerful goal. How about dealing with other people, especially difficult ones? Marcus must have dealt with plenty.
He certainly did. And his advice here is so humane and practical. To feel affection for people, even when they make mistakes, is uniquely human. It's about empathy, understanding.
Instead of just getting angry.
Yeah, he says, show them that. Prove it to them, instead of losing your temper. He saw kindness, genuine kindness, as invincible. It's about recognizing that people often act out of ignorance, not malice. Your response is your choice. Choose reason, choose understanding. It preserves your own tranquility, too.
That's a lifelong practice for sure. And then there's the constant drumbeat of accepting change and impermanence.
Yes, the Heraclean theme. Time is a river, a violent current of events. Everything is changing, decaying, passing away. Our bodies, possessions, fame, empires.
Sounds bleak, but it's meant to be liberating.
Exactly. If you accept that nothing lasts, you become less attached. You suffer less when things change or are lost. It fosters a kind of a healthy detachment, an appreciation for the present moment without clinging. It frees you from anxiety about the future and regret about the past.
Which connects to dealing with pain and adversity. If everything changes and our mind is in our control,
then pain and misfortune lose some of their sting. Marcus insists pain is neither unbearable nor unending. It's often our fear, our interpretation that makes it worse.
The thing itself was no misfortune at all. To endure it and prevail is great good fortune.
That's the classic Stoic reframe. Adversity isn't a disaster. It's a chance to practice virtue, resilience, courage, patience. It transforms you from a victim of circumstance into an active agent meeting a challenge. Don't add your negative judgment, and the harm often dissolves.
So, for Marcus the leader, the emperor, how did all this play out? How did philosophy shape his leadership?
He clearly saw his role as the ultimate test of his philosophy. It wasn't separate. His meticulous attention to duty, his efforts to work with the Senate, his focus on the empire's well-being, taking responsibility, these were practical applications of Stoic principle.
He saw Antoninus as a model leader.
Yes, he praises Antoninus extensively in Book 1 and holds him up as an example of steady, virtuous rule. Marcus believed his imperial role was the perfect place for philosophy. No role is so well suited to philosophy as the one you happen to be in right now. Being emperor was his philosophical practice. It demanded duty, justice, wisdom, courage, temperance every single day.
It's a compelling picture, but Meditations isn't perfect. There are criticisms. Matthew Arnold's point about a lack of joy, for instance.
That's a very common and understandable critique. Arnold felt it was more about enduring hardship than achieving happiness, a defensive philosophy. And the language supports that sometimes the mind is a fortress, life as a battle. Given Marcus's life, constant war, plague, it's maybe not surprising the tone is often about resilience rather than radiant joy. It's about finding peace amidst suffering, maybe not eliminating suffering entirely.
Fair enough. And then the moral blind spots, things that jar with modern values. Slavery, gladiators.
Yes, and it's important we don't gloss over those. He finds gladiatorial shows repetitive and tedious, but not inherently immoral. His comments on not abusing slaves are framed around preserving his own character, not the inherent injustice to the slave.
He never questions the institution of slavery itself.
No sign of it. For Marcus, like most Romans, slavery was just part of the fabric of society, an external condition. True slavery for him was internal being enslaved to your passions, your fears. Bodily slavery was just something to be endured, like illness. It highlights the historical distance, the limits even of profound ancient thought in challenging the fundamental structures of its own time.
That context is crucial. What about his personal faith? It seems sometimes more personal than just abstract Stoic logos.
This is fascinating. He uses God, gods, nature, providence logos almost interchangeably. It's clearly a rational, benevolent force underpinning the universe, but it's also deterministic, which makes traditional prayer seem illogical. Why pray to change what's already determined?
Yet he does seem to pray, or at least express gratitude for divine help.
He does. He thanks the gods for specific help, like remedies granted through dreams. And that amazing line, I know the gods exist from having felt their power over and over. It feels deeply personal.
So maybe the purely rational Stoic framework wasn't always enough for him. A hint of something more personal, more spiritual.
It really seems that way. Perhaps a half-conscious awareness, as one scholar put it, that the purely philosophical answer didn't satisfy every human need. You see him wrestling with it in that internal dialogue in 9.40, questioning the relationship between divine power and human agency. It shows his honesty, his ongoing search. Even the emperor-philosopher didn't have all the answers neatly tied up.
So how did this incredibly personal, sometimes raw, definitely not for publication book survive? Its journey seems miraculous.
It really is. We don't know exactly how it got through the first few centuries after his death. It's mentioned by a couple of writers in the 4th century, so it was around, at least in some circles.
Then it disappears for a long time.
Vanishes for centuries. Then boom, it pops up again in the 10th century. A Byzantine scholar, Arethes of Caesarea, writes about having a copy made because his old manuscript was falling apart. Thank goodness for Arethes.
Seriously. And it didn't reach Western Europe until much later.
Not really until the Renaissance, after the fall of Constantinople in 1453, when Greek scholars fled west, bringing manuscripts with them. The crazy thing is, only one complete manuscript from the medieval period survives today, a 14th century copy in the Vatican, and apparently it's full of scribal errors.
Wow, hanging by a thread. When was it first printed?
Not until 1559, almost 1,400 years after Marcus wrote it.
Incredible. And it's never been a huge focus for classical scholars, but it's always had this pull for people under pressure.
Exactly. Not a standard academic classic in the same way as Plato or Aristotle, perhaps, but it's always resonated deeply with people outside the narrow orbit of classical study. Leaders, soldiers, people facing tough times. Frederick the Great read it. Bill Clinton famously cited it.
That quote from William Alexander Percy about the unassailable wintry kingdom.
Beautiful, isn't it?
Yeah.
It is not outside, but within, and when all is lost, it stands fast. That captures the core appeal perfectly. It offers an inner strength, an inner refuge that external circumstances can't touch.
And that timelessness, that ability to speak directly to our fundamental human struggles, is why it keeps getting translated, keeps being read. It cuts through the noise.
Absolutely. It forces you to confront those basic mortal questions with honesty and courage. Hashtag tag outro.
So wrapping this up, what's the big takeaway for you listening right now? Meditations isn't about becoming an academic philosopher. It's not a history lesson, really. It's a practical toolkit.
Yeah, tools for your mind. Tools for perception, seeing clearly. Tools for action, doing good. Tools for will, accepting what you can't change.
It's about figuring out what's actually in your control, your thoughts, your choices, your responses, and learning to embrace everything else, events, other people's actions, even your own death, with a kind of calm acceptance.
Living in harmony with nature, with your own rational nature, and with other people. It's a path towards purpose, towards inner peace, towards building this incredible resilience no matter what life throws at you, finding stability when everything feels like it's shifting.
Think about it. Marcus Aurelius, he had all the power in the world, literally. But his real kingdom, his unassailable kingdom, wasn't the Roman Empire. It was inside his own head.
He learned to live straight, not straightened, as he put it, aligned with his principles, not bent out of shape by external pressures or his own emotions.
So the final thought for you is, what would it mean for you to find and cultivate that inner citadel, that quiet space inside yourself? How might really internalizing these ideas about perception action will change your relationship with the world outside, with your own anxieties, your own limits?
How could it help you live not just straightened by circumstance, but straight, aligned with your own best self, with purpose, and maybe, just maybe, with a deeper kind of peace?
Until next time, keep digging deep.